to the Alex Salmond Show and the second in our series on shipbuilding. Of all the great names of British shipbuilding, perhaps Harland Wolff is the most famous of all. A century ago, the Belfast-based shipbuilder also had shipyards on the Clyde, in Liverpool, Southampton, in Derry and in Dublin, as well as no less than 6 here on the River Thames. If not the largest shipbuilder in the world, it certainly built the world's largest ships, with the Olympic class including the Titanic, proudly launched from the Belfast jetty before the Great War. The decline of the company matched that of British shipbuilding as a whole, with effectively the entire industry now confined to military orders, with little presence in any commercial shipping market, a world market now worth some $250 billion. At its peak, Harland Wolff employed nearly 40,000 people in building and repairing ships. Now consolidated back in Belfast, it employs little more than 100 people and hasn't built a ship for more than a decade, and specialises instead in making bridges and offshore turbines. However, a new management is planning a comeback, and in today's show, we examine whether Harland Wolff can recover to redeem its once proud boast of being the shipbuilder to the world. But first, over to Alex with your tweets, your messages and your emails.
Well, first up this week is Tony Burke, who's commenting on Ian Waddell of the Shipyard Union's interview last week. He says, Ian Waddell talking good sense on the need for government to support UK shipbuilding on the Alex Salmond Show on RT this morning. And then Dougie Bendel says, really enjoyed today's show, brought to life the reality of shipbuilding in Scotland and the rest of the UK. The guests were great, bringing passion, hope and honesty. The supply ships contract must stay in the UK. And Kate says, yes, watched the show and was impressed by what you had to say. Working for the shipyard workers. My daughter lives in Govan next to the shipyard. They need the work to keep the community going. It's been a hard hit. Putting the work abroad will really hurt them. And finally, Kenneth McKenzie says, Eck, whatever you're paying Tasmina, it's no enough. She's lovely, a brilliant politician. You should get a longer show with Tasmina doing some more interviewing. I think what you mean, Kenneth, I should be doing less. We'll see what we can do.
Belfast skyline is still dominated today by Harland Wolff's famous twin gantry cranes, Samson and Goliath, built in 1974 and 1969 respectively. But the days are long past when this famous company dominated world shipping. However, there is a new hand at the tiller, and CEO Jonathan Guest is steering a course towards a revival in one of the great shipping names. But is it really possible that this venerable shipbuilding company can evoke the comeback kid of the 21st century? Alex has been finding out.
With yards across these islands, Harland Wolff was once a dominant force in world shipbuilding. The list of vessels completed reads like a compendium of the most famous boats of all time. Iconic ships built by Harland Wolff include the Olympic-class trio Titanic, Olympic, Britannic, the Royal Navy's HMS Belfast, the Royal Mail Line's Andes, Shaw Savills Southern Cross, Union Castle's RMS Pendennis Castle, and P&O's Canberra. No one believes that Harland Wolff can reclaim all of this former glory, but the company's now back, bidding to build ships once again. Jonathan Guest is the new Chief Executive Officer. Jonathan, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
Tell me, what's it like to be the new Chief Executive Officer of one of the world's most famous companies?
It's still sinking in, to be fair, Alex. I actually started in Harland Wolff in 1996 as one of 25 graduates and 120 apprentices, all started in the same year. And as an experience for a young man, as an engineer myself, coming out of university, you couldn't think of anything better. Shipbuilding was still in its boom. We had 3,500 employees, and the experience you got as a young man coming through was just amazing. Unfortunately, things changed on the way through, and I had left for a period of about 12 years and went to work in other industries, in construction and fit out in countries all around the world. I came back about 3.5 years ago, and I think the one thing people had said was, you know, has it changed much, Jonathan? And of course there were familiar faces, there were familiar places, so I said no, it hadn't really. But of course it had, because we weren't the same scale or size of company that we had been back in those days.
Yeah, you say about 3,000 employees back when you started, but I mean, Harland Wolff had 40,000 employees in the 1920s and now just over 100.
Yeah.
Can you really make a come back into shipping from that sort of level?
I think we can, Alex. As I explain to customers, as I have to do, because they question, of course, ourselves, I said we still have the capability, just not the capacity currently. And by capability, I mean we used to have a drawing office of 300 people, a team of 20 naval architects and steel engineers and outfitting and piping and electrical. Now we have only a handful of each of those disciplines, but we still have them, and those people still have the shipbuilding experience and the wealth of knowledge that is there. We have honed those skills in a commercial environment, so I think we are very, very well placed to be able to take that forward and look at the next chapter of shipbuilding. But what I will say is that this current round of certainly in naval shipbuilding programs and things, if we miss out, if we don't get part of that, and the next round isn't for another 10 or 15 years, there won't be the guys still left who understand and were there building ships. You know, we'll have lost that forever, and that's a generational thing.
So this is your route back in, the new frigate orders as part of a consortium, so as you can
That's
get
correct.
Harland Wolff back building ships again.
I think the key thing, Alex, certainly from our perspective, is it's not necessarily just the volume and the quantity of work that, for example, Type 31 will give us. It's the longevity of the contracts. We operate in a fast commercial environment where big projects come and go. We still employ at our peaks anything up to 14 or 1,500 people on the site, but it's gone in 6 or 9 months. So therefore it's very hard to get continuity. It's very hard to bring young apprentices in and see them through their 3 years of their time into, you know, the skilled trades. It's hard to develop graduates when you're going through, whenever the commercial pressures of trying to keep the yard going in between contracts is so difficult.
So that's your route back in?
Very much so. I mean, working in along with other big companies, the likes of Babcock, who have the yard in Rosyth and Appledore and Ferguson's and ourselves, looking to see how we can really enact what Sir John Parker put in the National Shipbuilding Strategy to distribute, build, to retain the skills and to work together as a consortium of UK shipyards, which I think hasn't been done a lot in the past, Alex. So we've always been very adversarial and almost cutting each other's throats rather than coming together in this consortium type thing, because it's certainly something that we need within Harland Wolff, because whilst we have the, as I said earlier, the capacity is a big issue for us for building a ship. The capability is there, but it's about how we do that. So this seems to be a very good route to market for us.
So John Parker, one of your illustrious predecessors at Harland Wolff, of course, you're fully behind his strategy of building up a base load in order to compete in other markets as well.
Yeah, very much so. And I think some of what Sir John Parker has maybe missed, or has been missed from his report, is the element of doing this so that we can have a competitive shipbuilding industry. It's not just about farming out work to yards across the UK to keep them alive and keep them afloat, because as we know from past history, that doesn't work. We have to be able to compete with the Europeans and on a worldwide basis on a much better footing. And we do that by having centres of excellence. We do that by having high skills, automation. But all those elements require investment, and as we all know, investment has to come through a good business case, which you can only generate if there is some level of longevity of work and of contracts. It's very difficult for a yard like ourselves, who are dealing on a contract, project-to-project basis, to make those long-term investment decisions to upskill the workforce and also to uptool in our infrastructure. Even though, as probably as well known, Harland Wolff has one of the best and biggest infrastructures within the UK, and certainly in the top in Europe also.
I mean, you've not been doing nothing since you built your last ship over a decade ago. I mean, what sort of activity has the yard been engaged in?
Yeah, well, since we launched our last ship, which was the Anvil Point, in ship number 7, hull number 1742, we've been involved predominantly in the energy industry, as I would call it, so oil and gas, and most latterly offshore wind. So the renewable industry, and certainly the drive within the UK to promote the renewable industry, has been a very, very good one. So that's the market that we have played in. We have came through a number of times doing logistics type projects, assembling and bringing the components that were built in other countries, and latterly we're actually manufacturing and putting the components together ourselves. But we have to do that with partners that we have all around the world. And I think that's the key, and certainly I see it as the key for our success. Trying to do everything yourself, trying to do it all from scratch, is a difficult thing to do now. So why can't we use the best practice from and the best cost from different areas and from different countries and bring it together to bring good UK content and UK prosperity, but not at any price?
Now, but one of your recent refits, of course, is a direct link with the Titanic. Tell us about that.
So SS Nomadic was the vessel that Titanic was built, and the scale of it in those days, Alex, was it couldn't actually enter into any of the French ports to pick up the passengers. It would send people out through onto the vessel. It had been lying in...
So it's like a package delivery.
A package, yes, very much so, but it had been lying in a desperate state off a French port. It was a restaurant and it moved around, been repurposed a few times, and thankfully was saved with help from a charitable trust that was set up, the Nomadic Trust, and was brought back to Belfast and now forms an integral part of the Titanic exhibition.
And was the package, was it like the same luxurious standard as the Titanic, or was it much more workaday ship?
I have to say not quite. It was, however, lots of the fixtures and fittings, and if you're ever lucky enough to get on board the ship, you will see a lot of period features that are of the ilk of Titanic. I wouldn't say so much the first class, maybe more the second or third class fittings and fixtures, more wooden benches than plus velour seats.
Looking back at the concept of getting this flow of military work as part of a consortium, would doing that make you more competitive in, for example, the offshore turbine, the structures for offshore turbine market?
We're blessed again with great facilities, so having an area dedicated to block or fabrication building for ships, an area in our main dry dock with our two cranes, Samson and Goliath, to actually assemble large-scale turbines, which we're doing at the minute. The job we're doing for Scottish Power on their offshore wind farm at East Anglia 1, we're assembling 18,000 tonnes of steel into finished jackets and putting that out in a space of about 9 months. So that's the scale and the ability that we have. But the problem is, after that's finished, there's no continuity of work. So having the allied work coming in beside that allows us to keep and maintain skills running through the yard.
And you can certainly predict that the size of offshore turbines is going to get larger, much larger actually, which will bring your sort of space and capacity into play.
Very much so, and we're seeing it already. You see turbine sizes now pushing 10 megawatts and going beyond that. So the infrastructure is not necessarily there within the UK.
Tell me a bit about the pride of a community in launching a ship. I mean, can you get the same satisfaction of launching a large offshore turbine, or is there something really special about launching a ship?
I have to say, Alex, that I am still a child at heart. When the crane goes past my window with a 300 or 400 ton piece of steel attached to it, I still have to stop and look out and in awe at this going together. There was nothing that beats the launching of a ship. I'm a bit too young, I'm afraid, to remember any of the slipway launches that we would have had and were famous in the past. There's something about the job satisfaction of raw plates, raw steel coming in, and 6, 7, 9, 10 months later for that actually to become a ship and see it sail away down Belfast Loch. You know, whenever my son or my daughter turn around and says, you know, what do you do? Or, you know, when you look at that sailing away, you go, I built that with a little bit of help then.
The yard's workforce, of course, will be tremendously enthused by a return to shipbuilding. How about the city of Belfast and the community in Northern Ireland as a whole?
I think Belfast is almost unique in its shipbuilding terms, that partly because of geography and partly because of topography, in terms of the shipyard's right in the centre of Belfast. Belfast being in a valley, you can see the shipyard and the cranes from 8 or 10 miles away. So it's always been at the centre. We are by no means the main employer in Belfast anymore, as we once were, but there is still that inherent history and pride within Belfast. You only need to travel to a bar, a restaurant or a shop and you'll see the iconic pictures of Samson or Goliath and all the wonderful ships that we would have built over the years. There is a real inherent sense of pride around what we do in Belfast, and I think a big part of my job is trying to reinstill that again, not just with the levels of employment, but also that people want to actually come and be attracted to work in an industry such as ours.
So in a phrase then, shipbuilding in Northern Ireland, sunrise or sunset industry?
Well, I wouldn't have taken on this job if I believed it was a sunset industry. I think sunrise is there.
Well, I can't build you a hull, but what I can do, Jonathan, is offer you an Alex Salmond Quaich.
Well, I'm very pleased to accept it, Alex. Thank you so much.
Many thanks for being... You know the drill, of course.
I do indeed.
Only Scots, none of that.
Well, I may have to, being a Northern Irishman, I may have to put a little bit of Bushmills into it. But thank you.
That's very acceptable. Now, coming up after the break, we talked to a former Lord Mayor of Belfast as to what it would mean to the city and its communities if Harland Wolff were to start building ships again. Welcome back. We've heard the plans for a revival of shipbuilding at Harland Wolff. Now, joining me from Belfast is Northern Ireland Assembly member and Deputy Leader of the Social Democratic and Labour Party, Nichola Mallon. Nichola, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
Now, as a former Lord Mayor of Belfast, tell us, how important is it to the city if shipbuilding were to start again in Northern Ireland?
Well, Belfast is the economic driver of Northern Ireland, and it's critically important, I think, given our heritage, our history, our skills and capacity, that we see a revival in terms of shipbuilding, but also as we have seen a diversification in terms of engineering when it comes to securing contracts, for example, with oil rigs or with wind turbines or in refitting cruise ships. So it's a very exciting time in terms of engineering and maritime in Belfast, and we're really excited.
Now, the twin cranes, Samson and Goliath, I almost said Delilah, but Samson and Goliath dominate the Belfast skyline. How does that emphasise the position of Belfast and the tradition as a maritime city?
Well, as you say, Alex, Samson and Goliath are iconic. Obviously, for people who have lived through the shipyard experience, it can mean a number of different things. But certainly for our younger generation and for tourists, it's extremely positive. It's iconic. When you fly into Belfast, whether as a visitor or when you're returning home, it gives you a real sense of reassurance when you see it across the skyline. It's a constant in a very fast-changing society. And certainly for me, I believe that Samson and Goliath represent the true mettle of Belfast. They stand tall and they stand strong and proud in the face of everything.
Now, in its heyday, I mean, Harland Wolff, perhaps some of the employment practices in that great yard had a darker side to them. Tell us about that.
Well, certainly as a result of employment practices, the shipyard was in many ways a cold house for Catholics and nationalists. It operated an internal market for employment. So essentially, your rite of passage was through your family ties. So if your grandfather or your grandfather worked in the shipyard, then it was highly likely that you would also work in the shipyard too. But those days, thankfully, are long gone with fair employment practices and legislation, and we're a very different place now.
Now, you were Lord Mayor of Belfast shortly after the opening of the great Titanic exhibition. Tell us about the enthusiasm, the success of that exhibition has been greeted with.
Well, the Titanic exhibition is a global landmark. I think this year we have seen well over 600,000 visitors, and we are delighted and extremely proud that we have embraced that maritime history and that we are proudly showcasing it to visitors from right around the world. But as well as the Titanic Exhibition Centre, the Titanic Quarter in which it is situated is a wonderfully transformed space. For me, it's about where the past meets the present and really points to the future. And it's a place of great celebration and regeneration with festivals. There are people from all across Belfast and further afield, from right across the world, gather there, and we just celebrate diversity and culture, and it really is a truly wonderful space of which we are immensely proud.
Now, shipbuilding traditionally has been thought of as very much a male-dominated industry. I mean, what prospects are there for young women coming through when the ships start to roll off the Belfast jetty again?
Well, I think that if you look right across the city of Belfast and right across Northern Ireland, you'll see that women are very much at the forefront. When I was the Lord Mayor, as you say, it was the first time that we had female Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor, High Sheriff and Chief Executive of Belfast City Council. Yes, that took us a long time to get there, but women are increasingly at the forefront of engineering. We have real exciting growth in terms of technology and design industries here, and again, women are very much at the forefront of that. So I very much look forward to seeing us diversify, grow our industries, and I am confident that women will be at the forefront of all of that.
Now, if the plans come to fruition, will you invite me over to see the first ship rolling down the shipway for more than a decade?
I will, of course, and more than that, I will take you, Alex, to Sailors Town, which has a very strong dockers community. Sadly, we have lost many of our dockers, but their children and their grandchildren are determined to keep that maritime history, those social connections and those stories alive. And I might even treat you to a whisky in the Dockers Club.
And that'll be Scotch whisky, I assume.
Oh no, it'll have to be an Irish one, Alex.
Recently, the Harland Wolff have been concentrating on building the steel structures for maritime, for seaborne wind turbines, which is obviously an expanding and a very, very productive industry. But you can't get the same sense of excitement in launching a wind turbine as you can in launching a great ship. Would you agree?
Well, I think that if you look at and take the wind turbine example, it's about building on our experience here in Belfast and that engineering capacity and ingenuity. Yes, it doesn't give the same excitement as launching a great ship, but where we have captured the excitement is in the tourism offering with the Titanic Exhibition Centre. And every day there are very exciting events going on around the Titanic Quarter. So while we mightn't have the excitement and the enthusiasm of launching ships, there are many, many other ways where we are doing things that are just as exciting, and the job of people like me is to be selling that.
Now, I just think that Northern Ireland is developing a much more diversified economic base, both within the Harland Wolff shipyard itself, but across Northern Ireland as a whole. What industries would you identify as holding the key to Northern Ireland's future?
Well, I think tourism, we have a wonderful tourism offering, not just when it comes to maritime, but right across. We have some of the most beautiful, and I say that in all objectivity, some of the most beautiful scenery. We have the Giant's Causeway, for example, one of the wonders of the world. There's also really exciting things happening when it comes to startup technologies and design companies. And I really think as we watch that and the development of green technologies, we really will see Northern Ireland taking its place on the global stage.
Shipbuilding in Northern Ireland, a sunset or a sunrise industry?
Well, I think we realise that we can't go back to a point or place in the past. Belfast is very much a forward-looking city. Just earlier this year, a company in Newry, MJM Group, they secured a multi-million-pound contract to refit a luxury Caribbean cruise. We've secured good, strong contracts when it comes to wind turbines, to oil rigs, and I'm confident that we're going to see many more contracts going forward. But Alex, Belfast is a city where there is perpetual sunrise. For us, the sun is always shining.
Nichola Mallon, I'll be sending you across an Alex Salmond Quake to hold that whisky you've been promising me.
I look forward to it, Alex.
Thank you for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
So plenty of support for a revival at Harland and Wolff. But shipbuilding as a whole has never been short of political enthusiasm. Even in the red leather benches of the House of Lords, the drumbeat of support has been sounding forth in favour of the report by Sir John Parker.
This is a strategy for industry as much as for government. Delivering these new ships means that we need a strong shipbuilding sector as part of a wider marine engineering sector that includes the shipyards, their suppliers, those that manufacture and support the equipment for the ships, and the skilled workers that support these companies. Industry and the trade unions were involved as we developed this strategy, and I would like to thank them too for their contribution.
Lords, any day that government says it intends to order new warships is by definition a very good day. But my 52 years in the Navy have made me realise that until you actually stand on the quarterdeck of the ship, you haven't got it.
My Lords, whenever I see the words ambitious vision in reference to defence expenditure, I'm afraid my scepticism is aroused, because like several in the Chamber, including the noble Lord King, I remember the days when we were promised about 50 surface ships, and that's a promise that was never actually fulfilled.
It may surprise some noble lords that I welcome today's announcement. I would welcome any increase in armed forces capability, but as noble Lord Campbell has suggested, one is properly fearful of not just the cost, but the opportunity cost of this enhanced maritime capability. And I hope it is genuinely an enhanced maritime capability. Costs always rise. I recall in the Defence Board in 2007, the two aircraft carriers were voted in at £3.6 billion. They're now costing £6.2 billion. This will, I'm sure, be replicated.
The House of Lords there bemoaning the fall of British shipbuilding, but expressing hope for the future. High costs, poor industrial relations and a lack of capital investment have all been touted as explanations for the fall of British shipbuilding. However, other high-cost locations such as Norway have built a key role in strategic parts of the industry, while the world market for commercial shipbuilding continues to expand. Successive UK governments saw the end of shipbuilding as inevitable and had no industrial strategy to arrest its decline or policy instruments to place it on an even keel with its international competition. Now, there is a strategy in the shape of Sir John Parker's report, but there are serious doubts if the wish and the will exists to carry it through. In the register of British shipbuilders, there are half a dozen UK yards listed as still building ships, and no less than 30 listed as defunct. Those that remain as significant forces are concentrated on building for one customer, the British public, and for one industry, defence. However, the plan to use the defence order book as a base for expansion depends on the drumbeat of military orders. As we heard on last week's show, the workers believe that only a full-scale campaign can win the day. Harland & Wolff are one of the iconic names of the industry's past. It would be entirely fitting if they can be a part of a brighter future. Next week we go north to the River Clyde to examine the prospects of another shipbuilding phoenix emerging from the ashes. Bought out of receivership in 2014, Ferguson, Scotland's last commercial shipbuilder on the Lower Clyde, is also planning a revival. In the last of our series on shipbuilding, we talk to the management and workforce planning this revival. Join us then. But for now, from all of us here at the Alex Salmond Show, we'll see you next week.